Hello, Anu.
Hi, Jane.
How are you, Anu?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Hello, this is Nanshu.
Hi, Nansu. How are you doing?
Good.
Okay, so maybe we could wait for a couple of minutes for Jeff to get on the call.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Hi, Jeff.
Hey.
Hi. Hello, this is Phil.
Hi, Philip. How are
Hi.
you? Okay, so then
Hi, Anu.
let's get started. So on the call today, we have Jeff, Philippe, Nansu, and from UT Health we have Jing. Firat is there?
Yes, and also Ergin is here.
Ergin, I hear your voice. Okay. So, we have just a regular agenda as we've had the last couple of weeks, where we will talk a little bit about the NCE work follow-up. But we also want to talk a bit more about a point that was raised by George Alter as they are getting ready to send us variable level data. And so there have been some offline email conversations that have been going on between Philippe, Jeff, and George. So maybe we can, the plan is to discuss a little bit more about how we would implement potential statistical data that we receive as part of the variable level data in the index, how we could display it on our UI, and Philip can also talk a little bit more about how the model could accommodate that. So, in terms of action items, Jeff, do we have any updates for the GDC PCIA ingestion? Hello?
Sorry, was muted.
Oh, okay.
I'll check with Barack on that, where he is on that. I've been traveling, so I'm not in the office. So let me check with Barack on that. Endar, I have a call with Dan Hall and the programmer at 1:00, I believe, today.
Oh, okay.
So let me.
And also,
Yes. Yeah.
Also with reference to Viper, Jeff, I know Nansu has provided IRD mapping file and the Viper mapping file, and I guess the plan was to index them.
Yeah. No, I'll check on all of those.
Okay, so all the indexing work you still need to check on it. So Nansu, you're working on the import.
Yes.
And do you have any questions, concerns?
No, so far we don't have questions.
Okay. Because if you have specific questions, then we can go back and get in touch with the import folks.
Yes, sure.
Okay. Or you can get in touch with them by yourself and, clarify all your questions too. That's fine
Okay.
as well. For the IEDB, Philippe, since you're on the call, do we have any updates? I know you were mapping the parts of the IEDB to that.
Yes, indeed. So I received from Jeff the instructions of how to run. So maybe I will have more opportunity to check this. So not much updates, not much progress on that front because I've been focusing on the use case for the statistics and the extension to the model with George, and I will have to get back to that and give you an update of what is happening on KC7 and why it took precedence somehow.
Okay. All right. Also, for the ICPSR, I received an email from Matthew and George that they are a little concerned about sending us all the variable level data or all the data sets that do have variable level data. I guess mainly because of the privacy issues. And so I think George is going to go over their data sets and send us potentially 10 ICPSR data sets that have variable level data and which they have kind of mapped into that. So my question is this number sufficient for us to try it out up front? Because I think the plan was to see how useful the variable level data would be to the end users. So there was some talk, I remember some time ago, about displaying both variable level data with the data set and without, and seeing if there is a difference in the usage for these data sets by the users. But if only 10, is this going to be sufficient? What do you think, Jeff?
I mean, it's because with those data sets, it's not. If I understand, it's 10 data sets. So that's basically the 10 records for that, which are going to be a number of individual measures, right? So
yeah.
We should have a. I didn't see anything in the email that said how many measures that would be, but I'm assuming it's in the multiple dozens, if not more. And so I think it's okay to start. Because right now it's more, I think, Philippe, we're still sort of discussing some of the modeling issues and things like that, right? So.
Right. Well, and again, we may just need 3 types of variables, ordinal, categorical, and continuous. And what is interesting possibly is and we will have to discuss that with everyone, is at least in my experience, in some studies, it turns out that some variables are consented, but the level of consent will vary depending on the type of variable. Most of the case, it's a widespread consent that is given to all variables, but sometimes there is this shading. So whether this has to be reflected in the model would have to be discussed.
But wouldn't that actually come under, I think, license? Let me see. Or even the reason I'm talking about that is because we've been actually trying to kind of finalize mapping SOPMED data to that 2.2. And as you say, there are different consent levels for TopMed data. So we were trying to map it, I think, more, let me see if I can pull up the mapping for it. I think right now, in terms of consent, the model accommodates it. Probably what we would want to do, I guess, but this is a kind of, I mean, I don't know. There's a huge overlap between BioCaddy and the KC7 work, but there is kind of the two properties that we have, which are access and license, to a large extent cover most of the consent categories and how you could map them, which is what we've been doing with the TopMed data. But there are some nuances that need to be, I think, teased out a little bit more, and that's something that probably we need to talk to you and Alejandra about in more detail a little later, but that's something that could be done otherwise. But here, I think there would be no, for ICPSR at least, as far as I understand, whatever we release would be things that would be available to the public, right?
Yes, I think so. So I think it's great to hear that you've got an extensive mapping of TopMed, because that will, as you pointed out, really help a lot in the KC7. At the moment, I'm revising the dbGaP one, and we have to look at GTEC. Also because, as you may know, under the KC7, that is somehow put against the BioLink model by Melissa Handel and Chris Mongol. I maybe put against, that's a strong word, because the two models would be evaluated for their strengths and weaknesses. I carried out a mapping between the two earlier this week, and I think they are to some extent complementary. I feel that the BioLink model covers a range of information which pertains to the kind of conclusions and findings of a study that would, in a way, produce a statement about the association of a gene variant with an outcome of a variable, or these kind of things. So it's not necessarily something we have so far indexed in DataMed, as I understand it. Maybe I'm wrong, and please correct me if this is incorrect. But it could be interesting to see how we can do things such as association. This gene is associated to that disease with the current model, or whether we need to rely on an extension, and that extension could be BioLink possibly. So these are the kind of discussions we are having in KC7. Yep.
Right. So I was actually going to ask Ergin to maybe join the KC7 call, also because Ergin actually built the terminology server that we use currently, which is independent of the model, right? It doesn't depend on how you map, etc. So the terminology service comes in after ingestion, where Jeff's team is actually adding additional metadata fields to the index.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point of time, we actually have some, the NLP service and the terminology services are called, and additional metadata is added on. And Ergin can speak more to how we actually right now have that all linked up. But as I understand, the back end is actually UMLS-based linkage, which is where the BioLink started off. So I wonder if...
Right, but the question is, what is BioLink actually modeling in the data set? So is it generic, this gene, impacts, this disease, or, whatever other links or associations there are, or is it the claims from that were drawn from that data set, right?
Yes, that's
So
my
the terminology,
understanding.
so the terminology server is doing a more global, saying that okay, if I see information on let's say mouse, right, then I should be able to expand that and say, okay, well this is the mammal, and is using the ontologies in terms of more global relationships. But
Exactly.
But BioLink could be used in both cases, right? Where you're saying that this data, ended up with this finding, right? Which is, so it's really not about the data set itself, but sort of the claims arising from that data set. If I understand correctly.
Yes, that's exactly what I concluded as well. But Anu is raising a very important point, and in fact, this is exactly what I also raised during the call we had yesterday, because there was a lot of discussions about what belongs to the model, and once we've done the ETL, what the model provides in terms of indexing capabilities. And my understanding was that a lot of the functionalities and the capabilities are provided not by the model, but by the search engine services which are built on top of DataMed. So I would absolutely support, yes, a presentation by DataMed, especially the query expansion mechanisms and these kind of things, and all how the search engine works. And maybe I think what we would have to do, when I started doing that somehow, is to go back to the use cases and the query cases and try to express them in a query language. At the moment, I've used JSON path because somehow it's available, and I assume that I'm navigating that. The JSON path is very weak, but it gives already some kind of coarse ways to present information if a data set is available in the format. So we'd like to hear maybe, sorry if I'm hijacking a bit the call, but all these issues are connected somehow. And this relates also on how we model dimensions and how the queries will be run, what are the use cases. Is it to assemble a cohort? Then we need to be able to query several databases and several data sets and list the variables and check the numbers and see if we can aggregate patients from two studies.
Mm-hmm. Right. Do we? I'm not very sure if we have the extensive and complicated use cases in BioCaddy as what we saw, or as the use cases that I've seen in the data commons, right?
Sorry, Anu, the connection is the connection is very bad. I can hardly hear you.
Okay. All right. So I was just saying that the data commons use cases, like the 2 or 3 that they have, are extremely. I think they're fairly complicated use cases. So I'm not sure if we have that complicated use cases in the BioCaddy set of use cases that we compiled, with the use case workshop, etc. So I was just wondering if you have taken a look at both to see if there are parallels.
So I took that. I went back to the all the use cases that we had classified, and I put that in a document. I will share that to the group later on, I guess, so I can show you that. I can share my screen. So alongside with the mapping between that and BioLink, I was compiling the level of the kind of queries that we need to answer. So that's why I went back to the use case, and then from there try to run queries over the model and see what we pull. And I think we have to go back to the 5 most, in a way, because there are so many use cases, we would really need to rank them by priority to see which are the most important to the clinician, for instance. And my understanding was that for the KCs, at least, what I've heard at the beginning of the call was that the use case of assembling cohorts was top, but that would have to be, again, reassessed with the evolution of the program as it goes along.
So just maybe a promoter, Philippe, I promoted you to a promoter. I think you need to accept something to be able to share your screen.
So let me, yes, okay. So it's firing up. Updating the plugin. So bear with me. Sorry about
that. Okay, so until we get that going, basically right now, Firat is also still working on converting the DATS or the API output into the DATS format. And as we talked briefly, Philippe is, I guess Jeff and Philippe have had discussions about the mapping for the NYU library and the IDB. And I think we probably need to get back to the data type ontology maybe in a little bit. Okay, Philippe, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I'm sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah. We see a spreadsheet.
Yes, I hope it's big enough. No, the one I want. No. So these are the kind of, you remember the use cases that we had. And so, and I start looking at, so for instance, this one, which is a basic one. So search for patients with phenotype X and disorder Y. So in a way, that's connecting the discussion. We have to check all the data sets that we have. If it's human, then if it's a trial, get all the patients and then iterate over the variable dimensions that have been measured somehow, and any disorder. So that's a kind of JSON path expression that I have here, and I give an example of how things could look like. And ideally, of course, if I presume you have a query language over DataMed, I think expressing those use cases in the query language and showing what can be done already would go a long way to help and convince people that is and the DataMed infrastructure is delivering. And of course, there will be things that are very hard. I will take one. I think anything that is related or associated with these kind of associations will be maybe more difficult. At least they're absent from that, and therefore we need an additional layer on top to surface this information. You see this one, for instance, where we have things that are a combination of image data types, so we can filter this. But anything that is predictive of disorder, the notion of this relationship between types and disorder, I don't think we capture that necessarily in that. So any of those queries would have to be addressed by the search engine itself.
Right.
So, do you agree, or?
So right now, yes, but is there a plan to kind of extend that to model the relationships?
That's a possibility. I mean, this is really for us to decide. I think up until now, we were somehow not shying away from indexing the findings of data sets. I think we left all the data matrices out somehow. But at least that's my understanding. And we focused on the discovery. Is there a data set of that type somewhere in PubMed, in DataMed? Now, if we want to say, okay, get me all the genes that are differentially expressed under those conditions in patients exhibiting that condition, then we need to do the extra work of dealing with the molecular dimension and the results, so the contrast and all the p-values and all these kind of things, which in itself is a tall order.
Well, it's also that it's not just from that data set, right? So, I mean, because you would have potentially multiple publications, looking at the same data, especially if it's from some of the larger archives like TopMed and the like. And so the question then becomes, are we then also sort of scanning the literature looking for results of data sets, and how does that then get modeled as well, right? Is the result sort of a separate piece that gets developed? Because it's technically not part of the data. It's not part of the core data set itself. So, and you need to be able to have multiple, publications representing those resultant annotations.
Indeed, and because the analysis may be updated as a new genome build is released, all these kind of things, and this will somehow modify the results of any query. And so I don't think this is a very easy task.
So I do remember that from our group we had what we called a GWAS identifier, right? A GWAS search engine kind of a thing, where we built a separate index of publications, which could actually pull up something like this. But those were specific for GWAS kind of data that we had, kind of similar to what you have on line 31. And so I think maybe we could try and leverage, if we want to do that, the algorithm that was developed for that study, for that particular pilot project. I think it was called GWAS Finder.
Mm-hmm.
But as Jeff said,
that
would be an independent. Go ahead.
So, I know this is why I came late. So what are we trying to find? We were trying to search literature, because the GWAS Finder is for searching literature.
Yeah, so Jeff was saying, so one of the things that Philippe has been talking about is how BioLink has a relationship between entities, and that is something that's not being modeled currently. In DataMed, it's something that's being added on either at the search engine side or during the indexing process itself, and not necessarily a part of the DAX model.
Well, BioLink has what? As entity, from entity to publications?
Well, if I understand correctly from the discussion, I mean, they're more like annotations of findings from data sets. A gene has a certain type of function, or basically resultant information.
So I'm sharing, I hope you can see my screen. I'm sharing the mapping that I did between DATS and BioLink. So in blue, you have anything that is related to associations between parts or entities. So this first one is a association between anatomical entities. And I don't think, well, I've mapped that into DATS as a kind of data type, even though it would be hanging loose, pointing to information and then extra properties. But it's a bit of a hack. If we scan through this document, we can see the type of things that BioLink provides, like environment to phenotype feature association, and then again, exome to transcript relation. So if this is absent from that, I would say, at the moment, explicitly, with that level of specificity that BioLink provides. But it seems to be that some of these functionalities are available on the search engine.
Yeah, so basically BioLink, this is a list of BioLink's type of entities, right? Or this is a relation, both relation and entity.
Right, this is a type of relations provided by the BioLink model.
Type of relation provided by. Then if they say device, what does that mean? I mean,
if we go, this is the kind of overview of BioLink class model. And if we go to the relationship types, these are all the relationships that they provide. So genotype to genotype part, genotype to gene, and so on.
yeah. So basically, this is the entity type and the relation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for example, at the DATS, we don't have a field called a gene, but we may have the field like in dimension or something, and that could we using NLP to recognize a gene, then we know it's a gene. So I don't know. I mean, is BioLink is really a model for describe a data set? I don't think so.
Oh no, it is not. It is not. And this is the point of discussion anyway. They are somehow complementary.
Biological entity and their possible relations, right?
Absolutely, yes. And this is the intent of this mapping between the two things, between the two models, to show how they can be complementary.
Yeah. So what are my envision, like how how DATS and BioLink can work together is DATS. We still use DATS as a metadata model for describing data set, but within a DATS field, for example, data type, and that data type, the actual value could be about gene expression, right? And that gene expression can be actually linked to a BioLink entity. Basically, right now we just have the term for the data type. Now use a controlled vocabulary BioLink to represent that. Is that something?
Yes, correct. But if you look at this document, for instance, on line 70, this one that I'm highlighting, a microRNA is a proper class in the BioLink, but it can easily be represented in that as a molecular entity and specifying its category as microRNA. So, and this is where I guess we would need to extract to see the kind of how consistent we are at the moment in mapping and reusing those concepts, those DATS concepts, and annotating them consistently across
so
results.
You want to map some of those like that types with BioLink types. What I'm actually thinking about, I would say this is like a molecular entity, then it has an ID, which is this micromark, like in the BioLink. like basically I was thinking to add an extra field in that with the extra attribute, just say BioLink ID. So we still annotate data like what we did before using that, but then we also know when we say molecular entity, then it actually have an attribute say this molecular entity with this BioLink ID, which is actually corresponding to micromole or something. Well, will that work?
I don't know. I guess it could work, but I'm just wondering, probably because I don't know enough about BioLink and who's using it and how it's been providing these identifiers. My understanding is that the microRNA, if it's tagged under BioLink, it would be given an identifier both in an ontology, maybe in sequence ontology, but also an ensemble gene ID, for instance, pointing to the genome region that is producing that microRNA.
BioLink itself is basically the API developed on top of Monarch, right? I mean, that's where it came from their disease, phenotype, linkages.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I thought. Jeff, that's my understanding. Basically, now we have the terminology server, which we load the UMLS, right? But now, what we really want to work with them, we can load the BioLink to the terminology server, right?
Well, I mean, the difference I was mentioning earlier is that the terminology server sort of gives general information about. So let's say you have an organism, that is mouse, right? And then you can say, okay, well, this is a mammal, right? So if someone searches for mammalian something, that, the ontology sort of provides those overall sort of ontology information, whereas the BioLink is saying that this gene, right, or this type of mouse has a certain phenotype.
Yeah, basically you're talking about
this gene in the context of this experiment, had a certain function. So it's not potentially just sort of the global type of information, but might be data set specific.
Yeah.
And in a sense, it's sort of those secondary annotations, and that's the question of, then you get to having to annotate other papers. So if a data set has information in multiple papers, results from multiple papers, those would be then separate BioLink style annotations, right?
So basically, we can use BioLink in two ways. One way is loaded as UMLS to the terminology server, right, for us to expand the search. The other way you are talking about, basically, it's also what I mentioned to Anu the other day is for this data set, we can also use BioLink relation to represent some relations for this data set, right? Right now, we only actually index based on entity. But now, using BioLink, we can actually represent some relation, right? Say this gene has happening in this cell. So that relation, we can also use BioLink to represent. And potentially, if we can index that would be good, right? Is that the case, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, it gets down to the use case for the BioLink information, right? Because that's really querying across sort of results, right? So Philippe, did you have any? Were there any specific called out? Was this?
Yeah. So
find me all data sets with genes that are involved in a certain type of metabolism. Is that the type of query that they're trying to get at? Is that because then the general annotating that. Well, again, it's tough because if that gene is called out in that data set, is it really about metabolism or not?
Yeah.
Correct.
My understanding is our current approach, for example, in DataMed, we are indexing on the entity. Say we will index this gene, we will index this cell name. And when they search, basically they will just search this gene, this cell, maybe join together. But now BioLink have a way, if we really want, we can actually also index the gene, cell, and what type of relation they are. And then that might also, the relation can be also indexed and maybe used for search later on. But our current approach, actually, when we do indexing, we don't consider those relations.
Yeah, I mean, the question is...
I agree.
Oh, go ahead, Philippe, sorry.
No, I think this is the point you made. It's about the use cases and the query case. If we don't have a clear understanding of what needs to be exposed, or then it's in a way hard for us to decide which way to go.
Right, and the question is, how are we going to get all that information, right, from these data sets?
Yeah.
I mean, because the repositories the repositories don't even provide all the information we need for a full DATS representation. And now someone's asking them to also store all the information about the results of those data sets in a. I mean, basically, this gets to that all the discussion around semantic nihilists and semantic idealists, right?
Right.
Like the people that want to tag everything, right? And I mean, just from what we've seen in terms of what people make available about their data sets, I mean, that doesn't even come close sometimes to proper representations. And now, how do we get this additional information on top of that, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. I actually see, I have two comments about if we really want to index relations. First of all, like you said, how are we going to get those relations? Some relations are not in the data set. Some, actually, when humans read it, they may realize this relation is implicity. Basically, if you want to use the NLP to extract, that would be actually difficult. Second comment is basically for our purpose of DataMed, since we are doing search, we just want to search, find. So if we find some data set have the gene, have the cell, we pretty much actually very close to, then user can look at the ranked list discern if it's related or not, right? So my point is, even without this relation, I don't know how much actually it affects the search.
So also, I think one of the things they've been talking about is providing, potentially annotating these relations, but that's, I'm not sure if they're expecting the repositories to do the annotations, because then it's going to be, and depending on the data, if somebody wants to rerun the data, it doesn't really, I don't know. I mean, there are new relationships that would come up. As Jeff mentioned, those could be published separately, and then you would have to go to literature to get those relationships in, which is why I was talking about the GWAS finder.
Say it again.
So, with one particular data set, if you are planning to annotate relations and genes, if that data set has been reused and published on again with a different set of genes, maybe for a slightly different use, and there is a different set of relations that have been derived out of it, that may not be available from the primary data set, right? It is something that would have been published, So you would have to go to the literature to get all the relations.
Oh, yeah, I see your point. So sometimes it's not about the data set, it's more about the findings out of the data set. And it could be
Exactly.
multiple way, actually, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are groups that are working on that, but they're still sort of early stages because it's how do you extract that information from the analysis packages and put it in a way that's sort of readable. And I mean, what Monarch has done is look at sort of relating the genes and phenotypes and things and aggregating information across databases. But I don't think they're aggregating information from papers themselves. I mean, I think this is, the model was developed by aggregating information. Philippe, maybe you have some other insights, but I mean, from what I understand, it's databases that have this gene and phenotype information that they're aggregating and combining, rather than
That's correct.
pulling it from the data sets themselves.
But even though there are edge cases where, for instance, if we index data sets from the public repositories and then we index the data sets that have been recurated in a gene expression atlas, for instance,
right.
That's slightly different. We had this discussion already, but this is where we would have to capture the relations and the differential expression. So an additional layer of information that may be necessary to capture.
Yeah, and there are some data sets that do that, right? So like Gemma, which we have, has some information on differential expression. So we could try, adding some of this information on top of some of the data sets we have that have this information. But again, if it's in the database, it's feasible. I still don't, if it goes more than just from these data, I mean, getting that information, I think, is the tougher issue, the tougher nut to crack.
Right. Yeah. So it's not all bad news, or but just there are also weaknesses in biolinks in what they can represent from the dataset point of view. On the second spreadsheet here, I've got a challenge to them, which is how do you represent those kind of dbGaP variables and in BioLink? It's unclear, and so in a way that leads to how we map the variables and dimensions into that. And what needs to be represented, and this is again the discussion we are having with George and Jeff and all the group.
Yeah, and just sort of the view of the landscape of who's involved in what. I mean, Melissa and Chris actually also have close ties to Carl Kessel and Ina Foster through rebuilding the kidney and some other. I think base spaces and other. Just in terms of, I remember someone mentioning that Ian was in charge of the KC7, right?
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So just giving you some information on the connections that I sort of know about.
Okay. So what's the? Okay. I heard Ian Foster, but what was the other name?
Carl Kesselman. So Ian and Carl are two peas in a pod.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Carl, has. Yeah.
Jeff, you know them well?
Oh, yes.
It's so small words.
This is
Yeah, but anyway, we'll see how it goes for the DAS. I think at least
so they're now moving to the second phase, and DAS is one of the two, along with BioLink. Is that?
So yeah,
That's
I don't
correct,
know what the second phase. It's we just started. Basically, they have two I don't know if they're going to just select one from two, DAS versus BioLink, or they're also maybe actually going to merge somehow if they can do something quickly.
Yeah, they were talking about the hybrid model.
Correct, yes. But I want to make sure that we place that in the best possible perspective. And
Right.
this is the kind of thing I think if we can also show the kind of queries we can perform and document them. And we already have a number of ETL ready for TopMed, dbGaP. So if we can revisit those, and the timeline is they want to have something ready for the 1st of May. So I'm working quite extensively on that, even though we have not been funded yet officially. So, but just to make sure that that is properly represented, and so we'll have to probably share all this work together, and participate to these elements.
Yeah. So my feeling is like if we're really talking about merge those two, that is definitely the metadata for describing data sets, and the BioLink can be integrated in the further to represent like those study variables to further detailed annotations about the data set.
Right. In fact, the study variables are on the side of that.
I know we have a variable in dimensions, but right now we didn't propose anything. Say we're going to normalize those variable, right? We just put the variable string there.
Correct. Yeah.
But BioLink can provide ID, right, to really formally normalize and represent those.
I'm not sure I follow here.
So in our DATS model, I think when we say dimensions, for example, have a study variable, right? Let me just think about just like a A1C value, a lab test, right? Right now, when we index, we just put A1C there. That's it, right? But we can actually map this A1C lab test to an ID in BioLink, and actually add this ID into the instead of using the name, we're using a normalized concept ID in the BioLink to represent or something like that. That's just my envision, like maybe one way.
Right. Okay. Yes, but that's I thought that somehow had already been not covered, but somehow inspected, because the model provides the dimension can be associated to an identifier directly.
Yeah, it could be identifier. Yeah, that's why I say maybe it could be the BioLink identifier.
Yeah, we can use the related identifier. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What I was more interested in is that there are a number of parameters like BMI, body mass index, for instance, that would not be available to the BioLink, as I understand it, as proper entity, unless it's classified as a phenotypic feature. But I think they lack a bit of granularity.
So right now, what's the plan? Are you going to present, and the BioLink is going to present too?
Yes, there are talks about having an introduction to the DataMed and the BioLinks. I think they wanted to have a presentation on March 29th, but I think this has been yes, but because of Easter break, I think this has been postponed. I will have to check with Owen White what's the status on that.
Oh, okay.
So, Philippe, does BioLink, I haven't looked into it in detail, but does it also include a lot of clinical or harmonized vocabularies that actually talk about clinical data? Do you know?
So I can show you. I can show you two things. I can show you this overview. So I hope you can see well enough. I will try to zoom in a little bit. So you see, if you're familiar with the Obo family, a BFO like ontologies. You've got biological entities, and you can describe the organism and so forth. And then you've got all the material entities. Then we've got something about disease and phenotypic features. What we don't have a descriptor for is the environment somehow, even though we describe drug exposure and treatment in that. Then we've got a link to molecular entity and chemical drugs and everything related to protein and gene. Even though in BioLink they are very tight, so it's very much more granular than we have in that. And then we've got a lot of things about information entities. So there's a type of disassociation related to this. And then we've got what they've got clinical entity. They've got a clinical trial and clinical intervention, which we cover in that as well. And then that's the element in the attributes to equal to an attribute or characteristic. Basically, we've got the clinical modifier. So they've got an indication of the severity, the frequency, and clinical modifiers. That's about it. So there is no proper identification of a dimension apart from attribute, possibly. So like things like biological sex, phenotypic sex, and genotypic sex would be characteristics under that. So I presume attribute is what goes under characteristics, but there's no specification of what would be a dimension as we have in that. So what I think some of the challenges are, and it goes back to the discussion we have to have about the dimensions, how we define them, and how do we associate a dimension to a temporal component for longitudinal studies, for instance, the same variable being measured repeatedly over time. In most repositories, these are declared as different variables, but yeah. Sorry, Anu. Yes?
Are they how complicated is are they have many layers, or just about three layers? That's it.
Well, it's not really layers, right? It's the complete graph, right? Because you can have a genotype to a gene association, genotype to variant, and
It's
those
a
gene
semantic network, right? It's a network then.
Well, I mean, they're hardcore RDF semantic web people, so it's truly the semantic graph, right?
Yes, they're querying. Everything is persisted in Neo4j, and they have got a set of Cypher queries.
Yeah, I can also ask our colleague Trey look into this a little bit. She's also worked a lot around the RDF stuff, most on the clinical side though.
But again, on the Monarch side, they're actually using the SciGraph as a backend. So
that's same as our terminology server, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay, so yes, I think we are reaching the top of the hour, so I don't think we will be able to discuss very much on the comparable. I've got time a bit available now, but it depends on everyone.
I have another meeting I need to leave, but you guys can continue if you need it.
I think George is George on the call?
No.
No. So what do you think? Should we organize a specific call, an additional one?
Yeah, probably.
Or can we follow up?
Maybe we could have a call with George, and I guess we could include Tree in the call too. And in the meanwhile, if she can look into BioLink and then we can go back and talk about how we want to address what we're talking about for.
I mean, maybe just before we break, I'm showing you still in the kind of in this Google Doc the kind of test challenges I've thrown to the existing dimension modeling extension proposal that is in the development branch of our Git repository. And these are the kind of queries that I throw. Get all the variable names in dataset X, get all categorical variable in dataset X, get the standard deviation value for all that dimensions in this dataset, and then try to drill into specifics. So if we have a categorical variable, get the values measured for a particular category, and then again it would give us a feel for the level of representation that we need to go for, whether we need to be very generic, as George put it, and contrasting with something with where I would encode a list of values by default for the core cases of variables to make sure that we can reliably query those. I know it's a departure from the style that we have adopted in that so far, but these are points of discussion, and there is nothing set in stone, just a straw man, things to discuss and throw around. And I've got the JSON path queries associated with that to see how the data can be extracted, even though this is a bit moot because the search engine will work differently anyway.
But if it's very specific, as you are suggesting, then you would have to kind of build the model for all the specific statistics that we expect, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, we would still retain a kind of the possibility of extra annotation. If we need more, then we extend that space. But if we are talking about descriptive statistics for filtering data sets on the mean or mode, max, min values, this kind of things, which are quite often the case, and at least they are presented in dpGAP, they are presented in ICPSR. I think we need to see exactly what kind of data that will be loaded and how they present themselves. If this is the pattern that is it covers 90% of the cases, then why not encode it directly? Or the alternative is to identify the resource in the ontology so that we recommend using for annotating this information. So again, this is a point of discussion. It's not set in stone. I'm happy to be to evolve this and change as long as we document the query case and show the capability. That's the way we implement it is somehow irrelevant.
Okay. So should we schedule another call then to talk about this, and then I can make sure I'll try and find out from George that he would be available to call in, and also since we're talking right now in DataMed, the way we have it, we haven't actually mapped a lot of metadata fields from dbGAP that would provide the variable level information. So we've had Madhuri do some mapping, and Jim has actually tried, she's been indexing and we've been looking at it. But maybe what we could do is send you the mapping that we've done to see if you think that some of the map or the mapping looks okay.
That would be great, yes. Yes.
because I think
No, that
at
would be.
some point.
Please go ahead.
No, so
No, please. Yeah, that's.
So we actually took whatever mapping we have currently in DataMed and took all the metadata information that we were able to get for TopMed data sets and then just mapped it further into that. So what I will do after this call is to send you the information and maybe you and Alejandra as well, and include everybody in the thread so that we can have a offline discussion. Maybe we can talk about it again when we talk to
Absolutely.
George.
Absolutely. No, that would be fantastic actually to have this mapping from TopMed. So do I get right that this mapping is somehow the transformation pipeline that Jeff is using to load? Or
Right.
is it on top of?
It's the same
Okay,
transformation
perfect.
pipeline. We've just done it
No,
in
that's
segments of DataMed primarily just because it's for data commons, but it's basically the same pipeline that Jeff has.
Okay. That's perfect. That's exactly what I was about to ask actually. So if you have that, I was actually reviewing the gap mappings and looking at the files that they serve. To see whether we had to expand a bit. But yes, no, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll schedule a meeting then with George and Jeff and Madhuri and I don't know, some of the folks from UT Health and you and Alejandra. Would that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Anu. Thanks a lot.
All right then. Thank you all. I think we'll talk about anything else that needs to be talked about again next week.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, thank you all.
All right.
Goodbye.
All right then. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.